2017 on the surface looked like it was going to be the type of season for the Green Bay Packers that we've seen so many years before. The type of season you've grown accustomed to with Aaron Rodgers at the quarterback position and Mike McCarthy as the head coach. This team was going to find a way to get into the playoffs. People were going to pump them up full of smoke because they've got arguably the best quarterback in the league in Aaron Rodgers. They maybe win a playoff game or two, and then you wait for Dom Capers and his defense to screw the pooch and wet the bed and the season to be over. And early on in 2017, it definitely looked like it was the exact same thing was going to play out. This team started off 4-1. They're heading into their sixth game of the season. It's against Minnesota. You feel like this could be a big game. And then Anthony Barr throws Aaron Rodgers down on his right shoulder. What was it, a broken collarbone? And now the Brett Hundley experience begins. Oh boy. So you lose the face of the franchise. You lose the best player in the history of your organization, arguably. No offense to Don Hudson. And now you got to go to an unproven former fifth-round pick out of UCLA in Brett Hundley. So what happened? The Packers lost that game to Minnesota. Well, you lose the franchise, you kind of understand that. They lost 3 in a row. 5 out of 6. And it really, really set them back. It was one of those things like you were wondering as the season was playing out. And again, we've seen this story before. Rodgers gets hurt in the season. Can they hang in there just enough for Rodgers to be able to come back? And then when he does, he takes it over. He wins when they need him to win, and they find a way to backdoor into the playoffs. Again, we've done this before. You wonder if it was going to happen again. And for Brett Hundley, you look at how things played out. He had a couple of good games, and he had some not-so-good games. The type of performance you would expect out of a former fifth-round pick, and that's simple. And part of what really hurt the Packers this year was when Brett Hundley did take over, he was only able to beat Chicago, Tampa Bay, Cleveland. He could only lead this team to victory over some crappy teams. And they barely, and emphasize again, barely beat Cleveland. Like, that was the closest Cleveland came to winning a game this season. Even Week 17 against Pittsburgh doesn't quite measure up to the choke job Hugh Jackson had in that game against the Packers. But, with all that being said, you got to a position, and I was kind of wondering, 3 weeks left to go in the season. The Packers are sitting there at 7-6. If they win out, get a little help, they could get in the playoffs. And again, history repeats itself. And here comes Aaron Rodgers, Week 15, Carolina. He's back in the saddle, baby. What's going to happen? How's this going to play out? Well, try as he might, he just wasn't good enough. The Panthers beat the Packers. They were, for all intents and purposes, right then and there, eliminated from the playoffs. They sit Aaron Rodgers. The Packers kind of whimper through their last 2 games and lose them all and finish 7-9, which is crazy because this is the first time the Packers have missed the playoffs, I think, since 2008. Is that right? Yeah, because 2009, that was the Arizona wildcard game. What was that, like 52-40, 45 or 46 or some crazy crap? I can't remember what the exact score was. Sue me. 2010 was the Super Bowl season. 2011 was the 15-1 that ultimately they lost the divisional round at Lambeau to the Giants. 2012, they played AP in the playoffs. 2013 was when they beat the Bears in Week 17. The freaking pass to Randall Cobb on 4th down. Isn't that the season that Aaron Rodgers missed several games and then he came back just in time for that? 2014 was the NFC Championship game choke job when they were up 16 and it didn't happen. Yeah. I think I've got most everything right, don't I? Yeah. Yeah, this team hasn't missed the playoffs at the 2008 season. So this is really unfamiliar territory for the Green Bay Packers. And one of the real tragedies of all of this is we all know Rodgers is a stud. Rodgers is a beast. Rodgers is arguably the best. But you feel like in a lot of ways, him only having 1 Lombardi trophy, 1 Super Bowl ring to his credit, is a damn shame. And you feel like the Green Bay Packers have wasted so many peak years of his career. And that seems to be absolutely the case. It feels absolutely true. And you just wondered if this organization was ever going to shake kind of out of its malaise of the arrogance of its belief in self and its system and philosophy and do things differently, because while they were successful and while people touted what percentage of their lineup were homegrown talent, what percentage of their roster were players that they drafted or undrafted guys they signed, whatever the case might be, at some point in time, yeah, that's great, but at some point in time, you need guys that can actually play. And the Packers, they have guys that can play in some spots. In other areas, they do not. And eventually that catches up with you, especially the lack of willingness to go big in free agency and get a guy here or there. Because ultimately, you're Green Bay, you're a historic franchise. Even though Green Bay sucks as a city, you should call it Brown Bay, and it's cold and everything else. You have all that lineage from the Lombardi Packers, Brett Favre's Packers, now here with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is an incredible appeal if you're a free agent and you want to sit there and make some money, but also potentially win a championship. Green Bay is going to be one of those destinations on your bucket list that you must go visit. You got to at least, Aaron Rodgers at least gets you a visit with these guys. Then it's up to you to seal the deal. But, as always, they ultimately didn't do it. So you wondered, was this finally going to be the offseason where the Green Bay Packers made some shakeups and some drastic changes? And luckily for Packers fans, the great news they got first was Dom Capers was sent packing after all these damn years. How he was able to keep his job for this long, I have no clue. But if there was any blessing out of this 7-9 season, it's that Dom Capers was fired. And in his place, the Green Bay Packers hired Mike Patton. Yes, that Mike Patton, former defensive coordinator, former Cleveland Browns head coach. And before you laugh about all that, take note of the time that he was a defensive coordinator in this league and how good his defenses were under him. This is an upgrade. This is a significant upgrade compared to an old and frankly out-of-touch Dom Capers. You have somebody much younger, somebody with more scheme versatility, somebody with more recent success as a defensive coordinator in Mike Patton. This was a great hire for this team, in my opinion. Then, if you're Packers fans, you got bonus news when you find out that Ted Thompson's no longer going to be the general manager. Holy hell! After all that time, no more Ted Thompson calling the shots, and I'm sure a lot of Packers fans are pretty giddy about that. Although they allowed Elliott Wolf and Alonzo Highsmith to leave the organization from their front office and their scouting department to go to the Cleveland Browns, which was a big coup for the Browns, but ultimately, Ted Thompson stepping aside, there comes a point in time where if it's not working and the guy's not changing and adapting his philosophy, and he gets very predictable in what he's going to do, and it's not working to the point that it needs to, then there is time for a change. And this was the time for a change. Because you've already wasted how many peak years of Aaron Rodgers' career? How many more years can you waste? And when Aaron Rodgers went out, yes, it's a quarterback. Yes, he's a future Hall of Famer. Yes, he's the GOAT in the league today, blah, blah, blah. But losing your quarterback shouldn't have been so devastating that a team with their quarterback wins 11 or 12 games maybe and makes the playoffs, only wins 7. That means there were more issues than just the quarterback position. How many things does Aaron Rodgers mask on this roster and in this organization? How many problems does he spray some cologne on? Well, it's going to be up to new general manager. I hope I say his name right. Brian Gutekunst. I think I said that. Close enough. Who gives a crap? He's a freaking cheesehead. But now with Gutekunst, he is going to be tasked with trying to get Aaron Rodgers back to the promised land. You can't sit there and be okay with 10 or 11 wins and making the playoffs, maybe winning a playoff game or two. You have a responsibility to try and go after it as long as you have this guy. And bringing in a guy like Mike Patton to be the new defensive coordinator is a good start. But now this team needs to go and be aggressive in a way they previously haven't, which is free agency. This is not to sit there and say just willy-nilly spend money just to get guys to say that you were aggressive in free agency. But they need to try. They need to take a look. They need to make an effort. And when you look at their team, I think first and foremost, you're going to have some interesting questions in terms of the salary cap. Brian Bulaga, could he be a potential cap casualty? I'd be surprised if he wasn't. I think they'd save a little under $5 million if they released him. Could Randall Cobb's time in Green Bay be coming to a close? Could Jordy Nelson's time in Green Bay be coming to a close? Or could one or both of them potentially restructure their deals? I'd find it unlikely that both of them would be sent packing, or maybe even either one of these guys would be sent packing. I wouldn't be surprised if one or both of them ended up restructuring their deals, especially now that the Packers have already re-signed Davante Adams, which was a great move by them to get him re-signed before free agency kicked in, where he was going to get overpaid. And then you look at Clay Matthews, a guy that gets all the commercials, a guy with all this name recognition, but very little recent production, $11.3 million. That's how much you could potentially save, I believe it is, if you cut Clay Matthews. And there comes a point in time where you have to wonder, just because of the past, just because he was there for win a Super Bowl, he's had some stud years. He hasn't had stud years lately. He has not been nearly the same type of guy. That is a massive cap figure to carry for a guy that has just been average probably the past 2 to 3 years, and that's the truth. So Gutekunst has some work to do in figuring out how he's going to reshape this roster. That's one way to look at it. Then you got to look at some of your own free agents like Morgan Burnett and Devon House, Ahmad Brooks, Jari Evans. Are you willing to let Morgan Burnett go knowing your secondary's already been a weakness and he's one of your best players in your secondary? I don't know. Then you look at the guys that they have that could be coming up on contracts in the future. Clinton Dix. You probably find a way to get that deal done. What are you going to do with guys like Ty Montgomery, Jake Allen? There's work to be done. There's absolutely work to be done. And when you look at the Packers, looking ahead to the draft, what do they need to get? They really need an edge rusher bad. That's something that Ted Thompson just seemed to really fail to do. Was you got Clay Matthews, and you can say, well, he invested a first-round pick in Nick Perry. Well, Nick Perry's not an explosive big-time edge rusher. He's just not. They need an explosive, difference-making type of edge rusher. Offensively, they could definitely use some help at the tight end position with the disaster of what happened with Martellus Bennett. I think Richard Rodgers is a free agent. They really have nothing at the position. Pick 14 in round 1 might be a bit rich for a tight end in this draft. I don't know if there's a guy worth that type of pick, but at some point in time, they need to find a guy. They probably could use some young depth at wide receiver based off of how much they throw the football. Why not? Again, Nelson's getting up there. Cobb's getting up there. Could always use more depth there. They could also use some depth on the offensive line. And if Bulaga is released, which again I could see being a potential possibility, then at that moment, offensive tackle becomes a significant need because you need somebody to bookend with Bakhtiari on the left side over there on the right side. And Bulaga, even when he's in there, isn't that particularly good, and that's the truth. And then defensively, it feels like they still need help in the secondary because they do. Until they get it right, they need talent there. The real truth of the matter is, and you could even throw an argument of running back, is that the Green Bay Packers have this kind of notoriety and they get this buzz. The fact is they're really not that good of a football team. And for a team that's had so much success in recent years, that's made the playoffs so many times, you really reached a point in the cycle where you either need to shit or get off the pot when it comes to trying to get another world championship with Aaron Rodgers. Because this roster has a lot of needs all over the place. But if they get it right, they can be right back in the mix again in 2018. It's just with a new general manager losing 2 of his top guys in Wolf and Highsmith to another organization, you wonder how this whole offseason is going to play out for Green Bay.